Hey guys, welcome back. This is the second part of the Arcturus two-parter video where we'll be disassembling and now reassembling the Arcturus AK-06. The whole point of the guy is to get the gun down to the hop-up and the gearbox here, and that's what we've done. So we're going to take the gun and obviously reassemble it from this point. First thing we're going to need is the body. There's this little insert here that holds the hop-up. It's pretty simple. It slides right in the back here and slides all the way forward. Probably just leave it in place during disassembly. There's really no reason to take it out, so go ahead and slide that into place if you happen to remove it. Now, with your gearbox, go ahead and have all your gear trains set up and ready to go. That's your selector lever here and everything on the other side as well. The biggest thing when we're reinstalling the gearbox into the body is making sure our wiring on the left side is lined up properly. We don't want any crimping or anything like that going on. So you can see mine is not well lined up, so I need to put it on the side of the gearbox. And there's a little trench there that it can actually fit through. It's a little tricky to get it in there, but once it's in there, you're good to go. You can see my wiring can move pretty freely through here. Once it's in the spot it should be in, that little trench that just sits right on the side of the body there. At this point, your gearbox really doesn't need to move, so to help keep it in place, I'm going to reinstall the selector next. The selector is essentially four components. It's a little spacer, little brass spacer that sits in here. This little metal ring with a notch on top. Obviously the notch is going to go on the very top there, and this kind of sits into place. It is a little tricky to kind of fit in there. It's very tight actually, so be aware of that. Selector will sit on top of that, and there's only one orientation it can really go in, and it just sits there. And on top of that, your little screw. Now, there's a little plastic piece that actually sits right in that little grub there, and that grub is actually for an Allen key, little hole there. I actually didn't realize this until this recently, so it's not a terribly obvious thing. So this is the screw back in. At this point, your selector will be installed, and your gearbox won't be able to move very easily. With that screwed into place, it should be pretty tight. You don't want your selector wobbling anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this little cap, and it just sits right in there and can come out relatively easily. So if you want to leave it out, I really wouldn't blame you. Next, I'm going to reinstall the motor grip. This one's not too difficult, but it can be a little tight sliding over the gearbox motor housing there. Actually, it's very tight. So be cognizant of the wiring, its placement, and then slide it very carefully into place until it seats fully against the body. You may have to give it a light tap so it finally seats into place. After that, there's a little screw that sits there, and it may not screw in all the way, but it is an Allen screw, so give it a good tightening, because you don't want your grip falling off essentially. It probably won't because there's so much pressure there, but just in case. After that, this little cap is simply going to slide into place, and you're good to go there. This cap is not easily going to come off either. At this point, we'll have our gearbox installed. I'm going to go ahead and slide our hop-up into place here. You're probably going to have to turn the hop-up all the way on. It fits into place much more easily, and it just slides into place here. It'll sit against the gearbox, and we'll want to just take anything and move our little plastic insert here into place. Now we can go ahead and install the two screws here that keep our hop-up right in place against the gearbox. These screws are just fillet screws, but keep in mind they do screw into small metal nuts, so you may have to adjust those for these to actually drop in and thread in properly. Don't forget to turn your hop-up off here if it is all the way on. It may cause some problems, so keep that in mind. Now I'm going to go take our outer barrel. That's just going to slide right onto our inner barrel there. Once that's flush there, we can take this pin right here and actually push it in from the right side. You want it to be at just the perfect alignment so that the barrel is all aligned perfectly, and get it flush with this left side here. That way there is a channel for a little rod that the charging handle sits against, and it won't have any issues there. After this, we can tighten down both our grub screws. You want these pretty tight, not too tight to the point where they're just going to completely strip out or anything like that, but tight enough where it keeps the barrel in place. And that should be sufficient, just a little past hand tightening. Once those are tightened down, we can take our gas block, slide it back over, and that'll just sit right there. From here we can take our pins, a little bit shorter pin than this one, a little bit skinnier, so it's impossible to swap them up by accident. Just be aware, it doesn't matter which side you punch it in from, but there are some kind of threads or knarling on one end. You want to punch that end in last. So have that end sticking out when you're punching this pin in. Probably want to use a punch of some kind, but I'm just going to use a small tack hammer. It doesn't have to be flush, but as close as you can get it, it'll look a little bit better. From here, I'm going to install the rail system, then install everything else behind that. The rail on this is pretty simple, and because I have a suppressor up front, I'm just going to slide this in carefully and kind of move it into place. This lower section just sits in place until the upper section screws it in place and clamps it down. From here, 2 screws drop in on either side. It's a really simple design, and once tightened down, the entire rail system stays in place. So really easy to take apart and put back together. This part I do find semi-optional because we do have a pretty big heavy spring pushing the hop up against the gearbox. It's totally up to you if you want to reinstall this little L bracket here, but if you want to, you could probably do it a little bit earlier, it might be a little bit easier, but at this point, you basically want to drop it in here and let it sit. Once reinstalled, we can go ahead and put our spacer back in the hop up here. You have to kind of insert it at a bit of an angle, and you might need to play around with it to get it to kind of drop in properly. But once you do get it to drop in, it sits there, screw goes in, screw gets tightened down. Really simple process. At this point, we don't have much left to do. We're gonna go ahead and reinstall our fake bolt. This drops in from the back here, and we're just gonna push it down this channel. Might take a little effort, but it's not too tough either. Our long spring and rod will stick in from the back of that. Make sure you line it up with the second hole that's in the charging handle itself. And this just pushes back into place, drops in this little channel here. Sometimes this can take a little bit of alignment and messing with, especially with this pin up front here where the rod kind of sits through, and putting this back in here. It can be a little tricky, but once it's back in, everything will work just the same as it did before. From this point, our dust cover can go back on. Just keep an eye on the wiring there. You don't want to crimp it. May need to give the top cover a little love tap to get it to seat back into place sometimes, but it's really not too tough. The AKs are not too tough to work on from Arcturus. They're actually pretty straightforward, and the AK-06 is definitely no exception. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them down in the comments. I know a lot of people, AKs are a little more complex than M4s in some ways, so hopefully this is helpful for you guys that need a little bit of a guide to disassemble and reassemble your Arcturus AKs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.